Wednesday's talk, I was describing how Waldorf education meets the needs of young human beings in a technological world by giving them a human education. And I listed some critical capacities. And so I'm going to be putting those back up, and then we're going to have some discussion about that after Susan speaks. Come on in. So we have, we're living in a very technological world, and technology is changing rapidly. As I mentioned on Wednesday night, it's changing so fast you honestly can't try and keep up with it. That the way that you deal with it today, and I've seen this from some of our alumni who've gone out into the world and gone into careers that involve technology, is that you pretty much just have to be fearless and to jump in at any point and look at some problem. And if there's a technological solution, you're going to be looking at many sophisticated technologies and trying to bring them together to solve a problem. And this is true whether it's computer technology, whether we're talking about renewable energy technology, whether we're talking about biotechnology. So many of our technologies today, and not just technologies, but the way that things are shifting politically, the way that things are shifting economically, the way that things are shifting in international relations. Things are changing so rapidly that whatever field you go into, you need to have this capacity to be able to jump in. And this really calls for flexibility in thinking, right? Creativity, having an open mind, and having quite a bit of self-confidence, right? So that's one of the first critical capacities. And Waldorf education addresses this in a number of ways. So in the early childhood, the children have activities that they do out in the real world. They play. They really developed their sense of their body. They developed their social skills. They learn how to interact with adults and children. It's really creating a foundation that's grounded in the world of real problems. So they're not just out there playing with Legos, they're out there playing with real sticks and stones, and they're figuring out complex geometries. And this comes back to a grounding in geometry when they get to 10th grade, for example. In the elementary school, what really gives us this capacity for flexibility is having more ways of expressing our thoughts. And so, as I said on Wednesday, it really comes down to developing a greater range of languages. So not just spoken languages, which of course our children here learn two world languages, but also languages such as music and form and color and movement, and drama, textile, wood, and so on. So they're really developing these different ways of thinking about problems. And then it was noted in the high school that we have a curriculum that supports them in developing capacities of judgment. So this discernment to be able to know what are the different pieces that are appropriate in a given situation. And that's where they really directly start learning about the inventions of the human mind, the technologies. And then I talked a little bit on Wednesday about how humans have adapted to their technology. Right? So we've adapted in many, many ways to our technology rather than it adapting to us. And so I gave an example where you see a black circle on a projection screen and you think, oh, that's black. But if you turn the light off, it's still a white screen, right? So we've adapted to, in some contexts, seeing black and white as the same thing. And that this leads us to having this, this challenge when we start communicating with people over the internet. We are doing so in a digitized manner, and because of our adaptation, we think that these communications are honest and real communications, but they aren't. And as a result, we often end up projecting ourselves onto the other person at the other end of the communication, depending on to what degree we know them. And so, so one of the capacities that's essential in the modern realm is this ability to see people as they are, and to know what is lost in digital communication. And so that when you're interacting with people through technology, you have an understanding of what it is you're not getting. When is it really important? And I gave an example of a study one of our students did about conflict, where they found that everyone who uses the internet has experienced conflict, and everyone who took the survey who had experienced conflict, the only way they resolved it was by meeting people in person. So this is one of those critical capacities. And we address this, of course, in early childhood by having children experience human beings playing with real children. And then in the elementary school, through various means, they continue to play, but they also experience drama. They have a strong community. They study eurythmy, where they learn really to feel the presence of the people around them. And so, then in high school, they go on an exchange for 3 months to another culture, and they also will go to a Camp Hill community for disabled adults, where they discover that they really are not disabled, and it redefines their understanding of what humanity is. So, according to the developmental stage, we're building this capacity in these children. Now, this same adaptation and the fact that the digital realm gives us only data and not facts, right? Because facts are grounded in reality, and in the digital realm, reality is all virtual, right? So there is no firm grounding in the digital realm. Another critical capacity that I identified was the ability to distinguish reality from fiction. So our children will encounter fake news and propaganda and marketing hype and exaggeration, clickbait, all kinds of things on the internet, and all sorts of subtle ways of manipulating them. And so they need to develop a real firm grounding in reality. And again, this is carried all the way through. So in early childhood, there's this definite grounding in reality through the play, through work, through imitating the teachers in doing real work in the classroom, as well as going out and manipulating dirt and sticks and stones and real things, so that they have this real bodily sense of what is real in the world. And then, of course, it proceeds through the elementary school with an experiential approach to education. And so they also are working with their hands, doing handwork and practical arts, and they're having field trips and learning outdoor skills and cooking and gardening, things that really ground them in reality. And then in the high school, the science is experientially based. The history is looking at the symptomatology of how various events occurred. They're developing research skills. They continue to do practical arts. They learn mathematical reasoning. And they study the technologies and their effect on the way that we receive information. And then, so I noted one of the reasons that we have all of these problems is that this disconnectedness that the breakdown in communication leads to leads us to have a sense of anonymity on the internet and a sense of power. And people will do things on the internet that they wouldn't necessarily do in person. There are many temptations on the internet, especially for adolescents. And at the same time, our actions on the internet are all being recorded, right? We're constantly being tracked by various companies and agencies and organizations. So especially for adolescents and young adults, this is not a great situation because they have this sense of invincibility and they want to impress their friends and they feel they're anonymous and they don't necessarily have good judgment yet, and so they're leaving this record behind which can come back to haunt them. And this really calls for another critical capacity, which is developing a strong sense of morality. And so, as I noted in early childhood, this is carried largely by the teachers who have to work on their inner development so that in all of their choices in front of the children, they are making moral decisions. They stand as someone worthy of imitation before the children, and also as people who have really gotten an understanding of what the children will be facing in technology and can stand before them, having that inner gesture of I know what this stuff is and I know what you're going to be facing. And then in the elementary school, its beauty is the fundamental basis for gaining a sense of what's moral. Right? If you have a good understanding of what is beautiful, you have a good understanding of what is a moral choice. And so in the elementary school, there's an attempt to surround the children with beauty in the classroom in the way that the teacher creates the drawings on the chalkboard. They work with arts. They are going out in nature. There's an emphasis all the way through on the encounter of beauty in everything that they see. And then in the early years, they're hearing fairy tales and fables and stories of heroes and myths and so forth that all carry these moral touchstones that they can subconsciously draw on in later life. And then when we get up towards the middle school and the high school, we're dealing more with difficult choices, difficult personal choices. In the high school, the literature explores moral themes, and we look at moral choices made in history, and then we continue to work with the beautiful, with the art and the drama, and more emphasis on service, and of course the direct exploration of how technology impacts moral choices. So in the high school, we're working to build this capacity of judgment based on the sense of morality that's arisen in the elementary school. And then the other thing that I noted on Wednesday was the way that technology gives us this sense of instant gratification especially for information. Right? And I gave an example of some students at UMass who I gave an image that was difficult to understand to, and they didn't have the curiosity to keep trying to figure out what it was. One of them wanted to take out his phone and use Google image search to try and see if Google would tell him what it was. And they were very disappointed that I wouldn't say what it was. They expected me to just answer. So this is leading to this sense that information is always just there whenever I ask for it, is leading to a decrease in a sense of curiosity. And so this is also a critical capacity, which is having curiosity and the volition to act on it, right? So not just, oh, I'll Google that, right? Oh, I'm done, I understand it. But to really say, no, Google doesn't have all the answers. I need to really dig into this. There's more to this. And so one of the things I do in my classes in the astronomy, when we get to where we're beginning to look at relativity, and this is something that really is beyond the imagination, and I give them, I say this is where science is, right? You're exploring things you can't see, and you can never know the answer unless you really work with it. And I give them these little boxes that are sealed tight, and they have some stuff in them that rattles around. They're called the mystery boxes. And I tell them, I'm not telling them what the answer is, because nature doesn't reveal the answer. And by the end of the trimester, I actually say, well, if you ask me the very last day of senior year, maybe I'll tell you. And they always ask, right? I mean, this is the beginning of junior year, and at the end of senior year, it's like, those boxes you showed us, right? They've held that curiosity for 2 years, and that's very important. That's how science actually is done. So these are developed in this volition is developed in the early childhood by the teachers doing work that the students can join in on. In the high school or in the elementary school by doing the chores, the handwork, the animal care, the practical arts, things that require sustained effort, like learning a musical instrument or a foreign language, learning the lines for a drama, and the rhythms of the elementary school curriculum at different levels, daily, weekly, monthly, seasonal. And in the high school, continuing with the chores and the practical arts and the service, but also doing extended projects, deeper research, longer writing assignments, coming to value initiative. And so what I want you to appreciate is that in order to be prepared for a technological world, you really need a human education. And to have a human education, it has to be an education that considers the human being as they develop from the very youngest age all the way through high school and meets them appropriately at each of those stages so that these capacities are most fully developed in the way that's most natural. And that's what we're here for. And as I noted on Wednesday, Rudolf Steiner, who founded Waldorf Education, identified this as a path that humanity was heading down, this path where technology could begin to drag us down into what he called sub-nature, that is below human nature, to take us down and down and down to where we would be fighting with each other constantly, and there would be conflict between all sorts of people through technology. And he designed Waldorf education as a counterbalance to that, with the goal that if the students develop these capacities, they actually lift themselves up above human nature to the same degree that the technology would pull them down. They develop a new quality of consciousness that actually evolves the human being. And that is ultimately the goal of a Waldorf education. So with that, I would like to invite Susan McNamara to come on to say a little bit about the work that she's going to be doing. So are you ready to? Okay, so come on up.
Thank you, everybody. I just feel like I have to also start out by saying that I think that this is an incredible and unique thing that Hartsbrook is doing, that the faculty and the staff have made a commitment to looking at technology and its impact on children. And it's no easy thing to do, and it's something that you don't find everywhere in the world. And I know, because I've been trying for like the last 15 years, both on a personal and a professional level, to have a larger conversation with a community about the impact that the technology is having on our children. And that's why I love what SHIP does, because it's just such a beautiful context and rationale for, taking not only the experience in computer science, but also looking at the development of children on all the levels, right? We have a culture right now that tends to really push the cognitive to the exclusion or to the detriment sometimes of the emotional, the social, the physical. And, here we are in this community where that's just the expectation, that the entire child is going to be included. And not only that, but that this community has made a commitment to looking deeper at a topic that is a very difficult one to wrangle with. Sometimes in my mind, equate it with the whole healthcare issue of, how we all know and have known for a really long time, like we have to do something, but nobody really wants to take it on because it's just too enormous to get into. And it just seems like there's so many pitfalls, and yet here we are beginning this conversation. And so I think that that's something to really lean into, that you are, that this is a community, if you're part of it, that's willing to have that conversation and to get into it and to not have the answers. I think that that's a beautiful thing, because really when I, talk about this with other people, I have way more questions than I do answers. And I've been finding more and more, I used to think that that was maybe some deficiency on my part, but I'm recognizing more and more it is the questions right now that are essential, and it is the questions that are informing us and need to be guiding us, because we are in uncharted territory right now. We are in the middle of an unprecedented experiment on humanity. We really don't know what is going to happen, and yet oddly enough, we already do know what's going to happen because we're seeing it with our own eyes. Or if you look at things like, if you know kids or young adults or teenagers who would rather text than talk. I ran into a piece of research not too long ago. 40% of school-age children that were surveyed were describing their computer as a trusted friend. This is a big deal, what we're talking about right now. This gets us on the physical level. When you look at what's happening to posture of our children, I teach at the college level, and I joke with them all the time that people didn't used to take this posture until they were in their 70s or their 80s. And I've got 20-year-olds right now who can't sit on the floor, who can't be in their own bodies without being uncomfortable, We've got so much repetitive stress injury. We've got eye strain. We've got sedentary behavior that's leading to obesity and all different kinds of health issues. And then what about if we get into the radio frequency radiation that's being emitted from the electronics? There's already a lot of research out there that's saying that it is changing us on the level of the DNA. That's our blueprint. And then we're talking about children who we know are way more susceptible to the impacts of environmental influences, right? We know that with things like lead and mercury and DDT, which makes me think that the World Health Organization classifies cell phones as a 2B carcinogen. That is the same category as lead and DDT. And yet this is something that our children have up against their bodies on a regular basis. And so we could go on and on with all of the statistics that are already out there about how it's changing the structure of the brain, about how kids who spend a lot of time in front of the screen have poor attention, have academic issues, behavioral issues, can't regulate their emotions, have nervous system disorders. And strangely enough, we all hear this information, we read the articles, and it will hit us for a moment, and then sometimes we're just off to the next thing, because that's the times that we're living in right now, where the information is just coming so hard and fast, like Chip was saying, like there's no way that you can keep up with all of this on an informational basis. And so what are we going to do then? If we can't keep up with this informationally, how are we going to go? How are we going to proceed? And so what I'd like to propose to you tonight is something that I've been working on for a while, and it came out of, my own raising of my own children, and then more I got into it on a professional level. But I want to look at it in terms of 4 things. And the first thing that I'd like to talk to you about is your presence. Your presence in your child's life matters. Leslie and I were talking about this before we came in, like the ability to be there with your child so that you can look at them, you can recognize, you can notice what's happening. And for many of us, that's a hard place to land in these days because of the busyness of our schedules or how overwhelmed or stressed we are. But these are our kids that we're talking about. And so our presence is one of the most fundamental things that we can give, because there is no way that we're going to be able to keep up with how fast this is moving. But I will tell you that every single person in this room that's a parent, you have a built-in mechanism. We're mammals. We have animal bodies. We register things through instinct and through intuition. And I know that you know when something's off when you see it and when you feel it. I know you do. But a lot of times what ends up happening is we get sidetracked because we feel like, well, I'm not the expert, or, the culture's pushing in a certain direction, or my kids really want it, or everybody else is doing it, or the marketing pressures are so strong. And so it leaves us in this position as parents and adults sometimes where we're doubting our place in their lives. And if we do that, we've left them, we've abandoned them, because they need to feel us. They need to feel us standing for something, being present, noticing them. So your presence is absolutely the most crucial thing that we can bring to this situation. The second thing is your values. And these aren't Waldorf values. They're not anybody else's values except your values, because if you can get really clear on what matters most to you in all the world, I will tell you something, where the technologies do and do not go in your life become a no-brainer. They really do. I know this from personal experience. Is it easy to get clear on your values? No. It took me years and years and years, and then I was like, oh, I finally got there, and now my kids are gone. And it's because it's a lifelong process. And my husband and I got into this habit where every year, we used to live on Cape Cod, and so every year we would go to our favorite beach and we would just sit and we would talk about our dreams, our goals, our values, what we wanted with the kids, and that it shifted and it didn't shift. There are always fundamental things that were always there. And this is something too that a lot of times, I know that if I talk to any parent, they would tell me how much their kids mean to them. And they would tell me how important family is to them. And yet a lot of times our stated values are not the same as our lived values. Because we get caught up in life and all the distractions, and suddenly those things are at odds. But I'll tell you who never misses that gap, our kids. Our kids never, and I know you know this, kids never miss the difference between what your words are saying and how you're actually living. And so, for instance, if you know that family is a really important value for you, it becomes an absolute no-brainer why there's never any technology at the dinner table. It becomes a no-brainer why there's no technology in the car. Especially for you all who carpool. So I used to carpool because my kids went to BVPA, and
it was the entire spectrum, right? You know, from ages, so they went there from 7th grade through 12th grade. There were times when we would be arguing in the car. There would be times when I would have a sullen preteen or teenager next to me, or somebody ticked off at me. And then there would be times when we would have the most incredible conversations about life, or that I would hear from them in ways that I normally wouldn't hear from them. So for me, I would never have put technology into the car with us. Was it uncomfortable sometimes? Yes. Were there times when I wish I could have given my son, when he was about 14, something so I didn't need to talk to him for like 2 years? I would have signed up for that. But I also, now he's 19, he's gone off to Nashville, and like our relationship is really close. It wasn't always easy. And that's one of the things that we have to really become aware of, is we haven't caught up yet with like where to have it and where not to have it. And sometimes we think we're getting out of something by like using it, and we are getting out of something in the moment, but we're actually not getting what we think that we're getting in return. And so your presence, your values, the third thing that I would say is your child. And so this for me is on 2 levels. It's understanding the unique child who stands before you, different than any other 8-year-old, different than any other 2-year-old, and it's also understanding a little bit about development. You don't have to be an expert. And if you happen to be part of the Waldorf community, the beauty is there's lots of developmental experts around here. All of the teachers here, all of them, not only really understand development, but know how to actually create an environment that meets that development where it needs to be met. And so, again, here we are. If you know, for instance, that a toddler, 2-year-olds, one of their big things is, right, movement. Movement. They move a little bit away from you, you're the home base, they come back, they're exploring. You know why it would be an absolute tragedy to stick that kid in front of a screen 6 hours every single day. You know that it would be a problem for them, not just physically, but all of the emotional and the cognitive and social things that are happening through the physical body. And so if we know our child, and part of this just means your presence. If you are watching your child, you start to really understand what it is that they need and what it is that is most natural and most innate to them. But it means you have to be there. It means you have to be paying attention. So your presence, your values, your child, and then the last one would be your involvement. And that's this. That's coming together and starting a conversation with a bunch of other people. I was just saying this to Leslie tonight. So in the schools that my kids went to, you know, it was regular public school, and then they did go to a charter school. We were very much alone in the choices that we were making. And it had its good sides, definitely made me stronger, and it had its really lonely sides too, and really challenging sides. And so I used to think that if I could do enough in my own home, that it would be enough. And in hindsight, not even close. Not even close. We need each other. We need the larger community involved in this, because right now, everywhere our children go, that's where it is. Even when you're making the choices that you're making in your own home, you can't count on your neighbor or your kids' friends' homes to be supporting the choices that you're making, or even, in my case, the schools that I was sending my kids to. You know, and I was saying to Leslie earlier, you know, I had teachers who would go from insinuating to downright saying to me that I was harming and depriving my children because they weren't on Facebook, they didn't have cell phones, they didn't have laptops. And that was really, really challenging. Really challenging. And so you all have an opportunity here to come together and to connect with one another and to create a community that helps to hold your children, because that's the other thing that I think, while I think my kids gained a lot by seeing me do what I did, I also think that they lost a lot too, because we didn't have a larger community where they could look around and they could see that other people were doing what we were doing. And so, you know, at best, you know, his friends' families used to call me the hippie. I think that was like the nice version. I was like, I'm good with the hippie. I didn't want to hear the other stuff. So, I highly encourage you, whether it's here or someplace else, to put together that level of support, because, that old hokey thing about it takes a village, it really does. It really does. And so, and yet here it is for those of you who are part of this community. So I'm thinking, what I have planned for us tonight, if you all are up for it, is that it's one thing for us to be talking about what I just talked about, and it's another thing to experience it. I find that if we can, just like what Waldorf does, if you can get to all levels of the being, you tend to have a different relationship to the information or to the experience. And so what I'd like to do is just to lead us in a little bit of an experience together where we can go through your presence, your values, your child, and your involvement. Okay? You all up for that?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So let me just get a couple of things up. So let's begin by noticing any sounds that you can hear in the room. And then see if you can extend your reach and notice any sounds that you can hear outside. Feel the temperature of the air on your skin. One of the most important things that we can do as parents is to engage in good self-care, because when we're balanced, when we're at ease, it's easier for us to see what our children really need. Let's do that again. Inhale as you come through center. Exhale, turn and look over your right shoulder. Inhale through center. Exhale, turn and look over your left shoulder. Bring your head back through center. Take a deep breath in, and on an exhale, turn and gently twist towards your left. And in your mind's eye, very slowly begin to allow an image of a child that you love, that you deeply care about, begin to come into your mind. And see if you can take for a moment, almost as if you were watching them, or even if you can even feel their energy, their vitality, what their personality is like. So you might see it in your mind's eye, that image of them. You might have that felt sense of them. We all visualize in different ways. Just see if you can imagine that child that you care deeply about. And for a moment, let that love that you have for that child fill your heart. Almost as if you could breathe right into your heart how it is that you care for them. And then right next to that, what is it that you most want for this child? What value do you hold for them on their behalf? And imagine those two things right next to each other. How you feel about this child and what it is that is most important for you to impart to this child. And then take your attention and go all the way down into your gut. The gut is often referred to as the second brain. It makes serotonin, which is a brain chemical, more neurons than the spinal cord. This is a place of deep, deep intelligence. And so from this place, ask yourself the question, is how either I am using the technologies or my child using the technologies in any way interfering with what I want most for them. If we are to do right by our children, we must allow ourselves to feel and to know deeply what it is that is happening.
We have to go beyond information and thinking and feel in these bodies what it is that we know to be true. And then ask yourself, if I had all the courage, the strength, and the support that I needed, I would, and fill in that blank. Affirm your capacity to do that by deepening your breath. Because really, I feel personally, this is never about demonizing technology. I feel actually like this conversation, technology doesn't even get top billing. Technology is like a distant second. That this is about living lives that really support the unfolding of our children and living lives where what matters most to us is front and center. And so when we're really living, when our kids are playing, when they're doing their homework, when they're doing chores, when we're spending time together as a family, when they're crafting, when they're playing music, there's like this much room left over for the technologies. It really is. And so for me, it's not about how do we push this thing out, it's how do we prioritize what matters most to us. Because when you do that, there is little to no room left over, seriously, for them to be zoning out in front of a screen. It really is true if you're really living your life and not, like I just finished doing the technology unit that I do with my college students. And I was saying this to Leslie earlier, honestly, I wish I could have parents come in and hear what the 21-year-olds are saying right now. They are completely frazzled. They are completely overwhelmed. They feel like they can't get off the treadmill. They don't feel like they have a choice. They don't feel like their friends are being truthful to them. They're stuck on social media. They can't figure out how to get off. And so I just totally lost my train of thought about where I was going to connect with what you said. Just went out. Sorry about that. What was the last thing that you said?
I'm just talking about trusting and by providing them with
You said
values
we
and
fill our lives and there's no space left.
Yeah.
And then you said you should clear the 21-year-olds.
Right. Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
And so, you know what they're thinking about while they're in class? They're thinking about getting back to their phone. They're thinking about getting back to their screens. And I had someone recently write that in the paper. She said, I know this sounds crazy. I'm just trying to get back there. I don't even know what I'm trying to get back to. And in my class where they can't bring any devices in, they're doing this the whole time. And they realize it and it bothers them. It freaks them out a little bit that they're always looking for it, but it's on their minds and they're not. I had another one talk about the fact that he let go of his art. He was an artist, started to get into gaming. And then we did the technology thing and he was like, what have I done that used to fill me up? And so we have to really understand that, like, even though they're pushing for it, the marketers are pushing for it, the culture is pushing for it, there's a way where it is so beyond them. And that's when we have to really come in. It's not about making it bad. It's about saying, this is what's most important in life. Like I'll joke with them sometimes. I'm like, do you think you're going to be on your deathbed and be like, oh, I wish I had kept my Snapchat streak going? No, you're not going to be, but you might be like, wow, I didn't really have very good relationships, or I spent all my hours gaming. Anybody else? So Leslie, should we shift? I don't know what time it is either. I totally lost track.
Almost 8 o'clock.
So I'll leave it up to you about what you want to do next. I just want to say thank you so much for being here, and it takes all of us together, and it is important work to be doing. So I really appreciate you listening tonight. Thank you.